Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lambremont Webre, and today we're very privileged to have coming to us from Ecuador an extraordinary author and artist, I must say. Looking at her paintings, I believe her mother also was an accomplished British artist, Carlita Shaw. Welcome, Carlita.
Thank you, Alfred. It's a real honor to be on your show. I'm very, very thrilled to be here. I've been following your work for a long time now. And, you're one of the few people that take a look at the puzzle, a piece of the puzzle, and then everything as a whole put together. So, you've got an extraordinary mind, and I'm really excited to be here with you.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Now, I know that you're in rural Peru, I believe in Cuenca. Ecuador. Sorry, I got them mixed up.
We're next door to each other, Peru and I. Yeah,
Right.
I'm not in Cuenca. I'm incognito at the moment.
Oh, okay, good, fine, sure. And
yeah, it's better that way.
good. And so that the sound is coming in and out, and I just will urge viewers to be very patient, and we're doing the sound as best as we can. The internet, it's not a perfect technology, and so we're coming to you from rural Ecuador. Well, and the reason why Carlita's with us is to speak with us about her latest book, which is The Silent Ecocide. And it's a wonderful, powerful, very well researched book on the 6 major extinction, the great extinction that we're in now, and what we can do about it. And I just want to read a sentence at the beginning and ask you an open-ended question, and then you can really teach us, because this book is so well researched that you could carry this book would be like a multi-hour lecture in a way.
I can say that.
Many people talk about humankind witnessing an apocalypse. However, very few people realize that since the Cretaceous period, we are now living in the 6th greatest mass extinction in all time. This extinction differs from previous extinctions in that it is caused by humans, not natural causes, as we are the cause. We can also slow it down or prevent it if we make big changes. Yet governments are aware of this, and we continue to accelerate it each year, and this affects every single species and ecosystem on the planet. According to recent scientific data, animals and plants are disappearing at the rate of 75 and 150 species per day. So let's step back. Could you tell us about, if this is the 6th great mass extinction, and we're the cause of this one, that's almost a paradox. Could you tell us more about these great cyclical mass extinctions? How is it that they come about?
Well, this one, basically, yes, it's caused and driven by us, and it's not for the reasons that people think it is. I touch on many different factors in the book regarding this, and obviously, other extinctions in the past have been by natural causes or meteorites and so on and so forth. But this one is definitely anthropogenically engineered, and it's not through the means that the media are making people believe, and which is why I have a chapter on the global warming hype and explain some details there. But if you look at every single species, there's evidence in every single species of extinction just going at a rate that we can't, people as biologists or environmental scientists can't even keep up with. So there's statistics coming in every year with the IUCN, and That's why they say it's around 75 to 150 species disappearing a day of plants and animals, because there's no one there to, document this full time. And the International Union of Conservation, they get their statistics in from different scientists doing different projects all over the world. So it's very difficult to really have an exact number of what's going on. As I said, there's many factors involved in this, and a lot to do with this is ecological illiteracy. And this is really one of the big pointers in the book. If we knew a lot more about ecology and ecosystems, this wouldn't be happening, because from the outset the government wouldn't be allowed to drive this, or the corporations wouldn't be allowed to drive this, and they are the ones that are behind it. Because if you just speak to the general person, most people realize that we're in danger with the planet, although a lot of people think it's due to global warming. But they don't realize what the real factors are that are involved, and that's what the goal of the book was, to draw out the details, and not just to focus on the negative, not just the eco side, but also on the solutions and the way we can steer this in the right direction, and the way that people themselves can contribute to making changes locally, because we can't really rely on governments or corporations to make these changes right now. This is a serious problem. So obviously, one of the big factors involved is the recent Fukushima disaster, nuclear radiation disaster in the Pacific Ocean, and we'll talk about that a bit more later. And the other aspects of this are the very large contributor to this is geoengineering, and ecocide, which is driven by oil and mineral companies mining in areas such as the Amazon rainforest and other wildernesses. And ecosystem collapse due to the geoengineering, because many species are affected by that. Although it was very hard in my book to avoid going into detail in different areas, because I will have to keep it very general, because I wanted to also make room for the solutions, which are really important for people to read about and learn about, because if they knew about the solutions, there'd be more questions as to why is this happening. So just to run through a few statistics here, because I've got my notes in front of me, I've got a lot to talk about. We've basically got thousands of fish dying in mass, especially in the Pacific right now. It's just dreadful. Fish and wildlife, about 4,000 seal pups have died over the last 3 years. And that's due to, obviously, the Fukushima nuclear radiation disaster. I know you've focused on Fukushima before, so your listeners will be aware of that. And then ecosystem collapse in general. You've got key ecosystems collapsing, not just the oceans, but the rainforests as well. Excuse me. So, this as well, the fact is that we've got these habitats being destroyed is a major factor in species extinction, because if you've got the habitat being destroyed, you have no other species to live or regenerate. But just going through the general statistics again, we've got, from Fukushima, about 66% of fish affected, or even more so, and this is similar statistics to the Gulf oil disaster as well. And then around 5,000 marine animals affected by this. And then also people don't realize that we're overfishing the oceans at the moment. And the oceans are extremely important ecosystems, because they are in fact the lungs of the earth. And people refer to the forests as the lungs of the earth, but it's the oceans that are the lungs of the earth. And this is another reason why we should be very concerned for the radiation fallout with Fukushima. There's 7,000 different species of algae, and most of which live in the oceans and produce about 330 billion tons of oxygen per year. So the oceans contribute to about 71% of the 70% of the oxygen that we need to survive, and the forests produce about 20%. Obviously, the ocean covers more of the Earth's surface, so that's why it produces more oxygen with the microbes and algae involved. So again, that's why we need to really take a lot more care of the oceans than we do. And it goes back to when I said people are ecologically illiterate, and this is one of the major problems. And because people don't know about this, that the oceans are a major contributor to oxygen, that's why the regulations aren't there. So, again, this is why the oceans are the lungs of the Earth. So, okay, going back to land species, about 80% of all primates will be extinct in about 30 years. And we're looking at, we've only got 620 western silverback gorillas left in the wild, and about 40 or 35,000 orangutans left in Malaysia because of palm oil plantations and deforestation. We have about 3,000 tigers left in the wild. Last year alone, 36,000 elephants were killed. They were hunted for their ivory, and every 15 minutes African elephants are killed for their ivory. So at the present rate, in 10 years' time, there won't be any African elephants or tigers or rhinos. The rhinos are becoming extinct very quickly. There's just one northern white rhino left. He has armed guards around him. Obviously, they're going to be extinct very soon. There are only 35 Javan rhinos and 400 Sumatran rhinos left. And the western black rhinos are already extinct. I mean, I could go through a list that would just really be very morbid to listen to. There's about 13,000 grey wolves left remaining in the USA. And it's a real shame because there was a study done recently in Yellowstone where biologists did a biodiversity survey, and they discovered that the wolves contribute to enhancing the ecology and ecosystems, and therefore encouraging more of other species to come into the park. So the wolves themselves encouraged more coyotes, and there were more songbirds and insects and wild elk. The soils were richer, and the quality of the ecosystems themselves increased because of 20 more vertebrate species thriving in their presence. So again, another factor that demonstrates that people are generally very ecologically illiterate, and if we knew more about ecosystems, this wouldn't be happening. There are only about 20,000 blue whales left, and about 55 Maui dolphin species, which are critically endangered. Then you've got the Indus-Ganges River dolphin, the Baja dolphin, and all of these are highly endangered. And then we go on to amphibians. They're very, very sensitive biologically. They're good bioindicators for biologists to see if there's any environmental pollution, because there's some of these species that are first affected because they breathe through their skin as a secondary respiratory system. So they're highly vulnerable to toxins entering their skin and killing them off. So about 41% of amphibian species have already become extinct. And this is an alarm bell because, as I said, they're a very good bioindicator that the ecosystems of the world are collapsing. They're in collapse. So other numbers that are coming in, so, you know, they're not the statistics now, they're the statistics of yesterday. The statistics now will be a lot more. So, you know, 25% of mammal species, almost 15% of birds, 33% of coral reefs, and many more tree and plant species. Yeah. So that's kind of the rundown of why we are in the sixth greatest mass extinction. Those are the clues as to what's happening here, and these clues point towards ecosystem collapse. Now, I'm sure many of your listeners will notice this, but you know, I remember about 20 years ago, if I went for a walk in the forest, I could hear all the songbirds, you know, I could hear many, many songbirds. But today, when you go into the forest, you don't really hear them. You don't hear so many. Have you noticed that around where you are?
Yes, and we've all been, you know, along with the disappearance of specific species like bees, that's all a great source of concern. A lot of people are saying, well, that's the effect of radiation, you know, the intentional intervention through Fukushima, through atmospheric testing.
Yeah, it's partly that. I mean, actually, probably half and all of these, as you say, atmospheric testing is involved. But I personally think that it's a lot to do with geoengineering.
Geoengineering.
Yeah, I think so, because these nanoparticles, the nanoparticles released from geoengineering, say just one plane, I think can spray out 10,000 tons in you know one day. I don't know if that's correct because I'm not an expert, but I have friends who campaign on this stuff. And the nanoparticles, as people may be familiar with, are aluminium, and they contain barium and strontium and other toxic chemicals such as arsenic and mercury. And you know, some people like Dane Wigington, he is an expert on this because he ran a company for solar energy, and he was discovering that over 20% of our sun is being blocked out, you know, and the question was why, and that led to the whole geoengineering issue. So I think bees are particularly affected because the particles have been traced on flowers and, well, you know, the flowers that they pollinate, and also because if the nanoparticles get into their bodies and into their brain systems, their nervous systems, they're unable to navigate their way back home to the hive. So their natural inbuilt navigation systems are affected as well. And I think these nanoparticles are affecting every single species from plant to animal. And because of the denial, it becomes a slow ecocide. And the only people involved in monitoring this are the citizen scientists. I will say that some of my better friends are those people who are in the geoengineering campaign, because as an ecologist or an environmental biologist, I'm one of the few people that will openly consider the geoengineering and other factors involved that other environmental scientists may not look at. Maybe it's because I'm an independent campaigner or ecologist, and I don't rely on anyone else for my paycheck. That's probably why I'm also poor. But this is a factor probably, and I can't talk to other environmental campaigners about this. Or ecologists or professional environmental biologists, especially people who are in the university system. Because they're afraid to talk about it.
Right, right. In fact, in your second chapter, I noticed when you go, your second chapter is entitled, quote, "Making Money Out of Hot Air Carbon Trading." And so you go into global warming, but you do it from a geoengineering point of view. So you're one of those ecologists and environmentalists who really bridge into reality and say, look, this sixth extinction, geoengineering is what's driving a large part of the sixth extinction in terms of just looking at the global warming. Could you talk about that aspect of it as well?
Yeah, I would have liked to have delved a lot deeper into geoengineering, but because in this book I really just scratched the surface with it, because as I said, I had so many factors to cover.
Right.
Because we're talking about the whole world's extinction, and there are many other factors involved. And I say right now, and that it's, I think it's a major contributor, but I don't go into great depth as I would have liked in the book. Geoengineering in itself is a whole nother book with effects on the ecosystems, and because we're relying on citizen scientists or just general people who don't know much about ecology, they're having to educate themselves, and which is why I admire a lot of people in the geoengineering field, because they're the ones that educate themselves and learn about ecosystems and how geoengineering affects soil, plants, and other species, animals, and human health and water, and the fact that it impedes our seeds from the aluminium, impedes our seeds from propagating. And what a coincidence, because Monsanto have suddenly come out with aluminium resistant seeds. All of these factors it could be a whole other book in itself, but I would have liked to have touched more deeply on it. And yes, as I said, that's one of the things, that's one of the reasons why I don't have any other environmental scientists as my best friends, because I openly talk about these things and I take them very seriously. I just want to go back to that chapter and say that one of the other issues that people do not know about, and it regards one of the solutions regarding carbon emissions. I have my own scope on all of this, because I have researched and looked into it and looked at all the different factors involved, and I look at all of the empirical data and not the theoretical data, which is what a lot of the global climate models predict predict and use, and those are the ones that the politicians tend to use. But the thing I want to draw people's attention to is because they won't know about the work of Sir Trevor James Constable. He was an amazing engineer, and he was a naval engineer, and he also flew planes. And he was a great advocate of the work of Willem Reich. If anyone is familiar with Reich's work, who studied orgone, which is also called chi, or ether, or kundalini energy. The ether is one of the fifth elements which mainstream science denies. And, you know, this is something that's going to be leading into my next book of work, because it's very interesting as a biologist looking at the ether as a repressed science, because it's relied upon by those alternative scientists to produce free energy, and it can also be used to engineer chemical-free rain, you know, and that's what Trevor James Constable has done, and that's why I interviewed him 5 years ago, because, as I said, this book encompasses at least 10 to 15 years of seeking out solutions for the crisis that we're in, you know, and then obviously I had questions that went to, well, why are these solutions being ignored, and so on. But Trevor James Constable was an expert in using Willem Reich's work to make rain where there are deserts, without any chemicals, without any kind of synthetic engineering or harmful electromagnetic energies involved. He had a very in-depth knowledge of the ether. And so he in 1990, he launched Operation Clincher with a very prominent, world-famous military figure, General Curtis LeMay, who actually played a major role in Operation Clincher. He wanted to bring this technology in naively to the government, to the military, to let them know, you know, how it could benefit humanity. But he died a month before he was going to present these findings, obviously, at the age of 83, though. But he was a major person involved in Operation Clincher, and what happened was Trevor was asked to clean up the LA smog in 1990. There was a very, very big problem with smog in 1990 in Los Angeles. And Trevor flew his plane over LA and did his thing with engineering the ether with nothing but a copper pipe lined inside with ceramics, a ceramic tube strapped to the plane. And people can find out about this on his website called www.rainengineering.com. Also, the interview I did with him is in my book. So it's the transcription is there, and they can also listen to the live interview at my site, Sailing Beyond Knowledge, Podomatic. So he did this anti-smog flight, and it cleaned up the smog very successfully by engineering the ether. And the Anti-Smog Bureau at the time just ignored it, and they acted as if they had cleaned up the smog. And then next year it came back. So, you know, this is just one example of how these alternative technologies that I have presented in my book could help many of the problems that humanity is facing right now. Whether or not carbon dioxide is a major factor in climate change, because, you know, carbon dioxide is used by plants as a food. when it's 2,000 parts per million. And, at the moment they're saying they're worried about, the figures, 3,000 or 4,000 parts per million. But when you're in a submarine under the ocean, your oxygen and carbon dioxide levels are very different, and with carbon dioxide it's 8,000 parts per million. So people really need to go into the deeper empirical data regarding climate change. Now, I don't want your time taken up with just talking about that in itself, because there's so many other factors we need to look at. But
right. Could I just jump in here?
Yeah, good.
Yeah. I just want to highlight for our viewers this remarkable case, and I just want to make sure that we got it correctly, and that is that Trevor James Constable took a technology that had been developed originally by Willem Reich, and essentially it's a cloudbuster technology, and he did an application to remove Los Angeles smog, and it was successful. Is that basically what occurred?
Yes, that's what happened.
Yeah, so this is an example of the successful environmental technologies to improve air quality that are available, that are very simple, and that are readily available, that improve human health. And I also have a question relating to geoengineering and human extinction, which at some point I want to ask you, going back to an earlier part of the interview. So you tell me when that would be opportune to ask you that.
Well, I mean, I think human extinction is something that's pretty likely following ecosystem collapse. I mean, I'm not a doctor as in human health biologist, but I personally think that the effects of these nanoparticles has a terrible effect on people's health. For one of the reasons, again, I'm so sorry about these.
Oh.
It doesn't usually happen like this. I tell you, it's very.
What's that? What exactly is that?
The trucks, the water trucks that on the
I see.
road, and they very rarely have this interference. So I'm so sorry.
Okay, fine. It is.
Okay.
It is what it is.
Yeah. So one of the things that I do know about regarding human health and these nanoparticles is a lot more people are becoming or displaying effects of autoimmune attack. So the system is, your biological system is attacking itself. Your immune system is attacking itself, and that's because these tiny little particles get caught in very delicate tissues in the body, in the organs we breathe in. They could end up in the brain and cause a brain lesion, which leads to autoimmune attack. Or somewhere else, another organ in the body, and you're basically constantly your immune system is constantly exhausted through that. And I know a lot of people talk about a rise in autism and gluten allergies and pollen allergies and all of that. But they're also breathing in these nanoparticles and on these chemicals that we don't know what they are, and you can feel the effects on the back of your throat, that horrible chemically tasting. I was back in Berlin a few years ago in Europe, and just for a visit, and I really could tell the difference, because here in Ecuador there isn't so much. We do have it here, but it's not as heavy. It's only heavy in the areas where you've got, cities, and actually I have seen it in the Amazon over different parts of where there's indigenous people, which proves that it is an attack on people themselves and their, the ecosystems as well. So in that respect, I can't give you any estimate regarding human extinction, other than we really do need to stop doing what we're doing to the planet now. And that can't happen because, we're being governed by oil barons, which are also one of the biggest drivers of ecocide. That part we haven't actually touched upon yet, but, that's one of the major factors involved as well. And I think the reason why people are so distracted by the debate on global warming, because the climate has been changing for 450,000 years longer. The Vostok ice cores, all the information is there in my book. People can read it with an open mind and make their own conclusions, but the fact is this is just a sideline of distraction, and it's also an excuse for bankers to make a fortune, governments to make a fortune, because when climate, the whole GW hype came out in 1994, so that's when Goldman Sachs realized they could make a lot of money from it. So they brought in carbon trading, which has done nothing to cap emissions anyway. And it's just been a great excuse for the elite to line their pockets with $15 trillion. So, that's just one of the examples why that's an agenda, and also because then they can say, when we complain about geoengineering, that they're calling the planet, they're saving the planet, when actually they're just killing us all and killing the trees and the bees. And then, the soil is affected by the whole geoengineering thing, and seeds don't propagate. But the thing also is CO2 can be sequestered into soil and rocks, and or there are other issues involved. But the other agenda with geoengineering, with carbon and global warming is, it's to tighten control over the world's water resources, which we're already seeing with regards to California and other places. Even though fracking companies can use 100,000 tons of water in California to frack. So, those are just some of the things. But the major concern, in my opinion, because I'm also an environmental biologist that sees great value in free energy, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about free energy, because I see the value in it stopping ecocide, and it can stop ecocide if it wasn't repressed, but because because oil companies make about $50 million an hour just from oil alone, they're not going to let free energy come onto the market to dominate the market. Or up until now, they've been repressing it, and there's proof on the internet. Anyone can look up for around 600,000 patents for free energy devices have been ignored. So that's one of the reasons why I think people's energy is being taken away by the whole global warming debate. And all we see on the news or in the newspapers are things about climate change and global warming and the Earth's going to fry that way. Well, actually, we're still in trouble, but it's due to, geoengineering and oil companies that are gobbling up the ecosystems of the planet, and good environmental activists and scientists are having their energy taken away and distracted by this issue, when they could be putting their energy and their campaigning efforts and all their hard work and free time into putting pressure on governments to make free energy a reality, and really pressuring them in that way, because until other environmental scientists acknowledge that free energy exists and it's not a conspiracy, we're not always, we don't have very long as it is, we're going into a doom road, we're being driven by these politicians that are bribed by oil companies through lobbying agencies, millions of dollars to rewrite environmental laws so they can go into protected places and frack or mine or do whatever they want, and with no regard to species or anything else, which is why my job as an ecologist has really been rendered mute. What can I do? There's nothing I can do. All I can do now is write about this, and try and bring some awareness with regards to ecological literacy. But, my biggest concern, as I said, is that a lot of really good people, intelligent people, environmental scientists and biologists and activists in general who care about the Earth, whatever they believe regarding climate change, they really need to right now be putting their energy into pressurizing governments on bringing out these alternative energy systems. Or more successfully, I think, more likely to get results is just for us to build our community networks and focus on doing this incognito ourselves, out of the way, out of sight, within our communities, because, I'm a bit cynical regarding, putting pressure on governments, but we need to let them know that we know that, this is something that exists, and then they're not acknowledging it.
Right. Could you begin to talk about the role of you touch on so many things. You have a whole chapter, for example, on the Amazon rainforest and the tremendous landmass that it covers and the function that it has on the planet, as some people call it the lungs of the planet. I think it's 20% of the landmass. And maybe just telling us about the importance of the Amazon rainforest. And yet, in the first chapter, you say it may not even be there in 20 or 30 years. Could you just talk to us about that?
Yeah, I will. I'm the reason why I'm in Ecuador is because I started projects here with a tribe called the Shiwayar tribe in the Amazon. They're based close. Their territory is based close to the Peru border, and you can only access their site via a small Apache plane, an hour and a half flight into the territory. And I've been in contact with people from that tribe for a long time, and I've been wanting to work with them for a long time. And when I got here in 2011, things changed quite rapidly. When I did get the opportunity to go right into the territory, which is, it's very difficult because it's quite expensive on these small planes. It's like $500 each way, which is ridiculous. So it's hard to do any conservation work in those terms. When I was in there, I was working with a French biologist, and we just so happened to be there when a military helicopter came in August 2012, and they landed uninvited. And my heart went up to my mouth because I just knew why they were there. And they said they were mapping the area. And I asked them what they were mapping the area for. Was it for oil? And they said, no, it's just never been properly mapped before. Well, of course, we got the answer a few months later that it was definitely for oil, and it was actually that month in August 2012 that the president here decided to break his promise of keeping the oil in the ground. Now, a lot of people will be familiar with the problems in the Amazon here in Ecuador through the Chevron Texaco case that you can find details about on Amazon Watch. There's more stories and updates there. But the Amazon itself is just an incredible place. It covers a small portion of the planet, about 5% of the Earth, but it contains about 50% of the world's plant and animal species. And there are over 60,000 plant species, and probably thousands more which haven't been named or discovered. The same with insects and everything else. And only 3% of those plant species have been studied for medicinal properties. We know that there's a lot of cancer cures in the Amazon, and that's one of the reasons. So before European settlers came to the Brazilian part of the Amazon, the indigenous people numbered around 10 million across the Amazon basin, and obviously that declined, and now there's just in the Brazilian part, there's about maybe less than 3 or 2 million, probably less than that now, because these statistics are a few years old, and recently, the last 5 years have been very intensive, just in Brazil, with the Belo Monte Dam issue. But here in Ecuador, going back to when I was in the Amazon, deep in the Amazon in 2012, back then Korea had officially declared that he's opening up 800,000 acres of primary rainforest for oil drilling. And, that's Yasuni protected territory, Yasuni National Park, which is, being noted worldwide for its biodiversity, and also uncontacted tribes. Several uncontacted tribes live there. So it's a real incredible place, and unfortunately things are getting worse now, especially for environmental activists like me. I'm risking everything just talking about it. It's really silly because last year a Shuar activist, Jose Tendeza, was tortured and murdered just because he wanted to go to the Peru climate talks in December last year. When the Peru climate talks were there in, I think, the beginning of December, he wanted to go and talk about the mining problem in Ecuador, because mining contributes to a great deal of the ecocide that's unfolding here. And when that happened, when he was discovered dead, it was quite clearly the work of officials. The government doesn't want to be embarrassed. And also Yasunidos, a wonderful resistance group, were heading for the climate talks, but they had their bus confiscated. They had been traveling all the way through South America from Mexico, and they'd not had any problems until they got to Ecuador. Some of the team of Yasunidos, and Yasunidos are based in Ecuador, they were told that they can't go any further because they didn't have the right driving license, but that wasn't true. That was the official story. So just talking about it publicly like this is dangerous for environmental protesters. So I'm kind of a bit nervous about talking about it, to be honest with you. People should read the book, but to find out more details. But it's the reason why my work is now mute. I've put things on hold because, in my opinion, if there isn't more conflict between indigenous people and oil companies now, it will happen next year. And then also we've got the new threat, which is the Chinese have decided to build a 5,000-kilometer railway from Chile all the way up to Brazil, which is going to plough through vast areas of primary rainforest and the territories of these uncontacted tribes. And obviously this will spell the end, decimation for these people, because they're not immune to the viruses and diseases that we are, and being displaced will be a great shock for them to be contacted. So the thing that's really driving all of this as well is a world debt. This is something I want to move on with you, if that's okay, to highlight one of the solutions I looked at, which was ecological economics.
Right. Now, have to your knowledge, have the Chinese taken any position to the preservation of the rainforest?
No, they're just interested in exploiting it. Basically, Ecuador owes about 14 or 15 million dollars to China, and Brazil owes a lot more. So pretty much these countries are in China's pockets, so to speak. And as we know, America is too, because America owes something like 15 to 18 trillion dollars to China, right? This is why I was looking at ecological economics, because if a country like the USA or here Ecuador could have every single ecosystem evaluated by experts in ecological economics. Well, we've got to look at the word economy for a start. Eco, which refers to ecosystems, and economy, nomi, basically it means how communities of people choose to use their environmental resources to meet their chosen living requirements. So therefore, economy should have always been based on ecological principles to begin with. There's a professor called Pavan Sukhdev who has been looking at converting ecosystem values and goods and services into an ecological economy, which will improve every country's GDP, the natural capital. And so you could talk about the production of, you could even include the production of oxygen in that case, clean air. You know, you can put value on the work that the bees do to pollinate our crops. You can put value on the kind of soil that particular country has in different areas, the richness of the soil, because, you know, soil is highly important for everybody. You know, we wouldn't be able to eat if we didn't have a good soil. And the work that soil does is an incredible amount of invisible capital. And so these are really interesting concepts that have recently emerged over the last few years that Parvan Sukhdev has been pushing forward. And if I just go back to ecosystems providing us with goods and services, which are things like food, clean air, water, and soils. And these are all services and goods that we don't put any value on or measure. So how can we take care of these things if they're not measured and managed properly? So the World Resource Institute estimated that the value of ecosystem services to the US alone was $33 trillion a year, nearly twice the value of the global gross national product of US, which is 18 trillion. And obviously it would take care of the US debt, which is $17 trillion. If the US ever switched to an ecological-based economy that used the concept of natural capital. So, you know, that concept, it involves a lot of very fine ecological statistics, and with these ecological economists. I'm not a mathematician myself, but, you know, hypothetically, the value of ecosystems that exist in a local area could regenerate the local economy and increase the wealth of a country that, you know, was previously classed as a poor country. So we're looking at, obviously, countries like Africa, where you've got all these conflict minerals such as diamonds and gold and coltan, which I talk about also, which is, you know, the mineral that's used to produce all the world's technology that's threatening the silverback gorillas, because Africa is the place where it's cheapest to manufacture or mine coltan using African slave labour. Yet Australia has a much bigger source of coltan in their country, but just because it's more expensive to mine it there, Africans have to suffer, and you know, the gorillas will be extinct pretty soon. So, you know, if Africa in itself, anyway, had all of its natural capital converted, it would probably be the richest country in the world. You know, so this is just one of the concepts that, you know, as I present as, or look at as a solution that we could use to move over from this destructive paradigm to a more sustainable one, which, you know, involved putting value on nature, and, you know, people would respect nature a lot more. I mean, if you said to me, if you proposed this idea to me 10 years ago, I probably would have thought it would be a bad idea, because, you know, there are some implications involved. But in the current situation, because we are being driven by an oil-based economy, which is driving ecocide, it's one of the major contributing driving forces, along with geoengineering. You know, we have to shift to something else. We have to, and I think natural capital and ecological economics, in that respect, holds a key answer for many countries, and will get us out of these countries out of severe debt. and also bring the power back to local communities, because they can manage their own natural resources and enjoy the capital that those resources generate from the goods and services that they're generating, which other people or other countries would be paying for to use.
Right.
So, that's one of my solutions that I...
Sure. And I can affirm that, because in parts of the country here in Canada, where the local First Nations or Aboriginals are being awarded the mineral rights through treaties, or reaffirmed their local mineral rights through treaties, then they are in the process now of revaluing their community values. I mean, it's not the full scale sort of resource-based accounting that you're advocating, which I think is fantastic. But at least you have the indigenous who have been there for, as they say, time immemorial, who are the owners of the land and of the resources from time immemorial, and then who are really the stewards of the land, and they're the ones who are administering these minerals in a sound ecological way, with a natural based accounting. So it's beginning to happen as within a treaty process. I'm not saying that it's perfect here, but at all. But I'm just saying that there's glimmerings of it here, and so I can I can understand exactly what you're saying and what you're proposing as a system, which I believe is a correct organic system for the planet. That's just my comment on that.
No, it's very, very encouraging to hear that. Thank you. It's being noted by the West and Western people, finally, that indigenous people are the best conservationists. And the reason being, they're extremely in tune with their ancestral land. They have an inbuilt library of the history of that land, the cycles, the ecological cycles, the weather systems, and everything, the resources. They are the people that should be managing their land and their wildernesses. This is what the book also talks about, and moving away from these centralized government centralization of natural resources, and allowing indigenous people to manage these very vast lands that they occupy, because they're just the perfect candidates. And also many of them live isolated, away from society, in wilderness. They still use hunting and gathering techniques, and they don't use money as much as we do, or some hardly at all. I mean, obviously in places like the Amazon rainforest, there are a lot of tribes that hardly ever have anything to do with money, and they still live that way. And in the West, it's a concept that's so alien to us, but there's people in this world that exist still today, and they have never used money. And the indigenous people are those people, and that's also one of the reasons why they make the most trusted and valued conservationists, because they are not money motivated. They're motivated by something that is their driving force for survival, and they will defend it to the death. and so these are the many reasons why they are the best conservationists, because, it's very difficult to corrupt, that kind of story. But just going on to, people in the West here, as part of, what I touch on in the book, I talk about in the last 3 or 4 chapters about ecological ignorance. And one of my favorite people who's also an ecologist is David Orr, and he also highlights, that lack of knowledge of the environment is, driving ecocide. And it's not, in my opinion, it's not accidental, this situation where most of us are ecologically ignorant. It's convenient for governments and organizations, even NGOs, who are supposed to be environmentally knowledgeable, lack, the real science with regarding, for example, climate change. They don't look at all of the evidence, and that's a very big sign of ecological illiteracy and incompetence that is allowing major corporations and governments and NGOs themselves to become a part of this corrupt destruction of our planet. And there's Douglas Radmore, who's another ecologist, environmentalist, and he noted that people who are afraid of nature or don't want anything to do with it, which we term as biophobia, by the way. You've got biophilia, which is a term coined by Edward Wilson. And biophilia is a word that describes our natural feeling of peace and calm and tranquility when we're connected with nature. And then biophobia are the complete opposite, where you just don't want anything to do with nature. Okay? But Douglas Radmore was talking about the biophilic and biophobic tendencies as a marker of cultures. And if we take the assumptions made by previous people in mental health, like Foucault and Horowitz and among others, the mental health is a product of culture as well. And the connection is very clear today that mental health problems have been on the increase worldwide. And one of the reasons for that is because of the problems that we have with ecological illiteracy and basically people being ecologically ignorant. Because what's happening is that people are losing their ability to feel so many benefits from being in nature or understanding nature. Because in order to understand how nature and ecosystems work, we understand ourselves better, not just as human beings, but as spiritual beings, and this is where we go into deeper ecology or spiritual ecology as well, which the book also talks about. We really need to see that the reason why mental health problems are going up or on the rise is, because we live in a very destructive society that denies that it's anything to do with nature. It sees itself as separate from nature or above nature, something nature is to be used, exploited, raped, and abused. And this is why we need to take into account again the indigenous philosophies, of reconnecting with our ancient spirituality, reconnecting with the earth, reconnecting with nature and the cosmos, because people today are subject to being turned into consumerist automatons, robots, you know. And with that, we lose our self-empowerment and independence. If we go back to nature, we can learn how to grow our own food again, and therefore, you know, we are not affected in the same way, or we are not so much as slaves to the current machine, you know. So at the moment, you're seeing a lot of people who've lost their feelings of self-worth, with a loss of being able to contribute to local communities or tribes in that way, you know, with growing food or contributing in some way to managing local resources, or, you know, some of these ceremonies and festivals that were involved with celebrating nature in local communities that we've totally forgotten about. You know, so all of these things are part of the human feeling, self-worth, or, you know, in a field or something like that. You know, that's just a silly example, but, you know, most of all, we've become very empty and bored, and constantly seek fulfillment and stimulus in the West. And obviously, you know, the capitalism just loves that, because it's a great way for us to stay distracted from the biggest issue here, which is causing and driving ecocide. So while they're distracting us with, you know, all of this awful garbage that people call culture, you know, the earth is being destroyed while, you know, somebody is answering a message on Facebook, you know, and even the most privileged people among us are suffering from severe depression right now, you know, and this again is the result of everything that's happening. It's very overwhelming if you are aware. You know, I often say to people who are not environmental scientists, you know, that being an environmental biologist is like being a psychologist who's had almost 20 years of suicidal patients. And, you know, at some point it affects you. When you're reading the bad news or, you know, the investigations and the research that you do brings up these terrible stories, you know, of catastrophe and ecocide and species extinction every day. You need a break from it, you know, and unfortunately, that's how it's affected me. It's driven my health into the ground, and, you know, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to focus again on writing and ecological awareness and bringing what I know, including the solutions, across to people, because I think it's very empowering, you know, for people to know these things. And there's so much more in the book. Obviously, we don't have time to discuss with regards to the solutions. But, you know, it's just one of the things.
Yeah, no, but I'd like to get to some of the solutions. And in fact, you have a number of chapters talking about alternative energies and the perspective of one particular free energy inventor, Sir John Roy Robert Searle. And I wondered if you could lead us through some of those solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I won't talk for Sir John Searle himself, but the interview I did with him was extremely inspiring and informative and fascinating. The chapter that leads up to that chapter before is a good founding chapter for people who have absolutely no idea of, you know, what free energy is, or they think it's some kind of exotic form of energy that doesn't really exist, or they don't know how to key into it. Well, this goes back to what I touched on earlier regarding the ether, you know, the repressed science, the fifth element, because there's different forms of ether, and one of those forms produces electricity. You know, this is why we have thunder and lightning. And, you know, one of the things that Trevor James Constable noted when he was performing his rain engineering experiments over Malaysia. He would always notice the thunderstorms that would follow. But, the ether, we're basically existing in a sea of energy. And just like, wireless internet, we can tap into free energy. And most people are taught that you can't take anything out of the system more than what you put in. Well, this is not the case. And this is what Patrick Kelly talks about in the first introduction to free energy. Most of these devices that people have come up with constantly prove, that what we're taught in mainstream science and schools regarding the laws of conservation of energy are not exactly how it goes. And, half of the story has been taken out, as per usual. There's always half the story is taken out. So, you cannot take more out of the system than you put into the system. It's the general consensus of mainstream knowledge regarding physics, but this is not true. You can take more out of the system than you can put into the system. And there are many, many ways of doing this, not just the solar power and wind power. There are ways of using the ether or coming up with other forms of energy using other materials like magnets and leverage and batteries that can self-charge or water. Hermann Clausen was a German scientist, and he showed how simple it is that you can pull energy out of the air or ether with an aerial, and that can have an output of about a kilowatt or so. So that's just a very basic example, and obviously Tesla did the same thing. He would put up big towers and draw in that energy that comes from the unseen ether, and Patrick Kelly does a wonderful job of going through many free energy scientists that do this in so many different ways. It's just mind-boggling. And so, that's a fantastic basis for people who want to learn more about that. And obviously, Wilhelm Reich and Tesla were major people there. And other people that people should research are Rudolf Steiner and Gunther Wasmuth, because he talks about the value of the ether in that way. So there are at the end of every chapter there's a lot of references to other scientific books and resources that people can use to educate themselves on all of this stuff. But going back to one of the reasons why free energy is really important, again, is because our planet is being turned into a nuclear time bomb. And obviously we're just dealing with a very small fragment of that from just one nuclear power station, with Fukushima. But the US alone it consumes about 25% of the world's nuclear power, and is only around, I think, 5% of the world's population. I might be right or wrong with that. So the amount of nuclear waste produced per person is around 40 grams per year, and that's an incredible amount. And there are about 438 nuclear power stations on the planet right now, but I think about 380 of those are functioning. It might be more. And so each one is generating 3,000 tons of nuclear waste per year. And this means that altogether, that every year, the human race is generating 1,314,000 tons of nuclear waste globally. So, and it can cost about $20 billion to build a nuclear waste repository just for one of those, amounts of 3,000 tons of nuclear waste per nuclear power stations. So basically, that's one of the other reasons why we need to really campaign for alternatives and help support the free energy scientists, by providing them with as much support and transparency as possible. Now, some people will think that Dr. Stephen Greer is a chariot for that movement. I'm not so sure. I've got other evidence in the book that points he could be something else, but I don't want to go into that. But the chapter on Sir John Searle touches on that issue, because Sir John Searle has met with a lot of people, but he never met with Dr. Stephen Greer, and he never showed Stephen Greer his SEG device, his magnetic device. That's just one thing, small thing. But the thing about Sir John Searle's device and all these other devices is, again, they all have this common theme to them, and that is because they tap into this etheric energy, they can do these wonderful things like neutralize nuclear power. Sir John Searle claims that his SEG device can neutralize and clean up nuclear radiation. I can't quite remember how he explained that, but it's in the book. But his electromagnetic device can also clean up air pollution and all these other terrible things that we are dealing with right now. And it could also provide us with travel across continents that would reduce hours to minutes. If I flew from here to England, I'd be there in 20 minutes, if we used a device such as Sir John Searle's electromagnetic device. His device is made up of a ring of magnets and creates an energy field. And his work, he had a lot of early productive work in the 30s and 40s, where he built many of these flying disc devices, and learned that again, magnetism isn't as we're taught. There's more than two poles, and using them in the way he did, he learned that his device could levitate and generate amazing quantities of electric energy. But I won't speak for him in how his device works, because all the details are there straight from his mouth, So yes, that.
Right. And so these now, how, in your view, are we going to do that flip, that transformation out of the petroleum nuclear matrix into the free energy into the free energy world? How is that going to occur in your judgment?
Well, it's so true when people say that free energy requires a huge shift in human consciousness. So first of all, that's one of the major factors involved. And it's because, we are uncovering a repressed science here, a science and technology that was used by our early ancestors and ancient civilizations. They knew how to tap into the ether and create energy on levels we just can't even imagine. And, so we've forgotten about all of that, and we need to go back to it, and that requires, again, as I said, a shift in consciousness. But it's not something that's going to happen instantly overnight, and it will happen though, well, very slowly, but it is happening already. I mean, I personally know places where devices are being used, and they also being used in communities that are self-sufficient. Or I know people who are completely on their own using such devices. And it's people like that who, a friend of mine, Kingsley Dennis, says they're quiet pioneers. I think he calls them the monastics. He's written a book called the Phoenix Generation, and it very, very wonderfully follows on from the last 3 chapters of my book, which focuses on consciousness and connecting ourselves to the earth and sustainability and free energy. And he talks about how we can move to this new paradigm as well, focusing mainly on consciousness. And it's funny because he uses similar words to me. I often use the word bridge builders when I'm referring to the next generations of people who will be, helping us make that shift to a new paradigm, a new consciousness, so we can use free energy, and that we are free sovereign human beings at the same time. And, we're moving back into that new golden age, which many of us envision, but some people feel very overwhelmed at the moment. And my work is about making people realize that they have the tools. They just don't know that they're there. But the tools are there. They can use them. And once you educate yourself on these solutions, you can find a way to apply yourself, in this movement, to be a bridge builder, a map maker, or a seed planter. And, every day people like you and many, many others that follow you are intentionally putting out that energy that they want to change the world and wake it up. And we're putting that energy out constantly every day, even when we're just sharing little bits of information that focuses on truth, or the horror of something, which is truth. And if we're putting out that energy of intent and every day to raise awareness, it's like a daily mantra or meditation, even if the person's not meditating. They might be putting something on Facebook. Many people are busy spreading news of truth and new things and free energy and any things that are in my book. The importance of that is a lot more than people take granted for, because it's a daily mantra of intention that we hold on a subconscious level. And the fact that you and I are talking about this stuff is proof that, consciousness is changing through us. The energy field of the planet is changing. I went to a lecture last year by an Indian guru who came from India to Ecuador to tell Ecuador that the Earth's energy chakras are changing, and the heart chakra, which used to be in India, is now in Ecuador. So, that's obviously and I touch on the Earth's energies in the book, because, the reason why I touch on so many different subjects is because the ecology of nature is very intrinsically combined with human ecology and human consciousness. And, it's a huge elaborate woven story, and we need to reconnect with nature in a way that we become empowered, and we can't rely on governments or lawmakers to do this alone. We have to do it in our communities. We have to find ways we can passionately apply ourselves using the way that works best for us. to do it in a way from your local place, or you might feel that you need to relocate somewhere else and apply yourself somewhere else in another country. But the fact is, please, people, I mean, I've been so despaired and depressed over the years, but the fact is things are shifting and changing. And, coming from someone like me, that's a really big thing to say, because, I've been so terribly heartbroken over the state of what's happening to Earth. But I have, recently have met some incredible people that I feel are just proof that this is happening, and it's just so obvious to me now, that we embody that. And I do tell people that I still feel like my work here is done. It's up to humanity, where they take this course. But I think the best part of humanity are those that are going to be taking us into a new world. And we need to be conscious that and this is a lot to do with your work, and this is why I have a great respect for your work, because, you'll talk about the positive timeline again. We need to realize that we have to use our imagination, our intentions for a healthier vision, for a healthier, more balanced planet. That has so much power and energy in itself. And if people can just have faith in that alone, that also helps so much. Because people's imaginations and minds have been governed by, the oligarchy, and the power of our imagination and the power of consciousness itself is so strong, and we just need to tap into it in a way that we can understand it and utilize it.
Right. Thank you. Now, I would like to begin to help bring your work and your thought to a wider audience in North America, in other parts of the world who may not be familiar with it. And I was wondering, how can people follow up and access your work, say, online? Are there websites or other outlets?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking, Alfred. There's a number of websites. Well, there's a website for the book first, which is www.thesilenticocide.com. I've also set up a page on Facebook called The Silent Ecocide for the book. There's also ecology projects that I've had to put on hold because of the situation here in Ecuador with the government being extremely violent to environmental activists like me, and like, for example, just talking about this puts me in danger. That's the situation here. So I had to suspend my projects, but I'm going to be bringing those out again, because one of the things I want to do is start getting support for a project we have, which is about building a 3-dimensional database for medicinal plants. Now, that's the reason why I'm spurred on to go back to that project I shelved a while ago, because we didn't have any funding for it. It's because there was a tribe here recently that published a book with 5,000 medicinal plants. Now, this is not a book. This is a database which can be accessed, and the person accessing knowledge on a plant, for example, say achote, which is a plant where people, the tribes use to paint their faces, or ayahuasca, something like that. They can access the database and look at the plant as if it's there in front of them 3-dimensionally, because we can scan the plant into a 3D scanner and then have it presented with all its ecological data and how the indigenous people use it to treat illnesses or in rituals or ceremonies. And that's called the Shaman's Apprentice Project, or SAP for short. You can find details about that on my site, www.evolvetoecology.com. And then there's another project, shall I say that website again? www.evolvetoecology.com. And then there's another project which I've started called the Gaia Letters, and it basically gives people a chance to think about what their vision of a future Earth would be like for their children and future generations. You know, if things were to go well for us, again, it's using the power of your imagination, your intention, and you know, getting a collective group of people together to share or express how they feel about what's happening now and what they would like to change and what they see for the future for the planet. So that's the Gaia Letters. But I have a friend who's also a writer called John London, and he sent me a link yesterday to a book that somebody else wrote, which is kind of similar. It was called The Global Voice, but it was full of letters from very prominent people, you know, like the Dalai Lama and other people. But this is for the actual people. This is for everybody, and it's the goal of this is to get everyone expressing how they feel about what's happening now, and what they would like to change, and what solutions they themselves would like to present or be a part of in the future, or you know, how they would like to see the Earth preserved, you know, in 100 years time or 50 years time from now. And anyone can take part in that project. They can send me an email through the Gaia Letters at gmail.com, the Gaia Letters at gmail.com. And that's just something I felt I had to do as a positive continuation from the Silent Ecocide, because it was so depressing to write that book. Well, the first half of the book was depressing, but the second part is very uplifting and wonderful, because it focuses on solutions. But I'm doing a number of other things too, so people can follow what I'm doing from those sites.
Yeah, well, we obviously at our news site will be featuring all of this, and you have a chapter on the environmentalists and ecologists in your area who have been tortured and murdered by the government for the simple reason that they're bringing up just the issues that these, you know, that the indigenous should be present at these conferences. I mean, just and present at the table. And so it's a source of great international concern that that people that environmentalists and ecologists are being under threat. And so we're going to be publicizing all of that, and we're going to be making sure that you have open access to our publications. We have one, ecologynews.com, and newsinsideout.com, at which you're welcome to provide us with ongoing news in this area, because it's extremely important that environmentalists and ecologists get their news out and are protected.
Actually, that's a point I totally forgot about, because it's a chapter in my book, we are environmental protectors, not protesters. I actually have a website called Environmental Protection is Not a Crime. And I've been updating that site with all these related stories of environmentalists being murdered or tortured or put in prison. And you know, it's in Brazil and in Peru, it's very noted, and obviously now Ecuador is following suit. And you know, this is just another example of the corporatocracy or the fascist imperialist corporatism that we're being dominated by. And, you know, it needs to change. And there are good people, again, making those changes. There's the work of Polly Higgins, for example. You probably are familiar with her, although for some reason she didn't want to endorse my book. You know, I praise her very highly, but I think there's some other issues going on there. But she's a great person with regards to pushing forward the ecocide laws against ecocide, rather, to put ecocide back on the Rome Statute, to make it a fifth crime against world peace. I mean, obviously it needs to be there, but it was taken off the Rome Statute. You probably know more about this than I do.
Well, no,
you know, but no, just briefly, but her work is about making ecocide an acknowledgeable international crime, like genocide, because ecocide basically results in genocide. If we don't have nature, if we don't have a healthy ecosystems, you know, we start to die, and that's what we're seeing everywhere. So she submitted a draft of the law in 2010, and she brought the public attention to the Rome Statute and the statute of many countries involved that make up the International Criminal Court with the aim for a peace treaty against genocide and ecocide and human rights violations. But the ecocide was removed from the list in 1996, I think. So she's trying to get it back on there, and obviously, you know, this goes back to the corruption that we're seeing in with DC and politicians being legally paid or bribed to rewrite environmental laws by these oil companies, you know, some of the biggest companies owned by Koch brothers, and a lot of these Zionist movements, you know, own these huge oil companies. And it is a lot of the Zionists involved in this ecocide, you know, because they're the people who have the power. So, you know, they bribe the politicians to make rewrite environmental laws or policies so that their oil company can go in to a site and frack the area or exploit it for oil, even if it was previously protected. You know, I'm actually, I forgot to say earlier on that when Korea did promise to keep the oil in the soil before, he made a secret deal with China when he claimed to be protecting Yasuni for them to have access to that oil. So, you know, it's things like that that wouldn't happen if we had these restrictions on environmental law, because we need the restrictions for these super corporations because they are now writing the laws. So, you know, this is the main message of the book. The silent ecocide is happening, and it's going to get worse because we've got a corporatocracy or imperialist corporatocracy driving humanity to ecocide. And it's a highly serious problem. And people just don't realize the immensity of it. And if politicians are being bribed by these huge oil companies to make these decisions, we're just going to see a dead planet, you know, in 20, 30 years' time. In 20, 30 years' time, we won't have any rainforest if we keep destroying it at the rate that we are. But there are other positive initiatives coming up, like Colombia has joined forces with other countries. Some parts of Brazil and Peru are going to join forces with Colombia to create a wildlife corridor for the Amazon. Ecuador doesn't seem to be interested, but that's something I would like to put pressure on and start to be active in next year. Depending on, you know, we'll see what happens after this interview if I'm still here. But, you know, and so then there's other issues involved as well. So I'm really happy that you've got a page devoted to this issue, because we need it now more than ever. And you're somebody that is in touch with a lot more people than I am.
Good. Well, we're beginning to come to the end of the segment, and I just wondered if there's some points or some issues that you have not mentioned yet that you'd like to bring to the attention of the viewers.
Oh yes, there's a lot, and there's so much more in the book. And the book is a great opportunity for people to really open their eyes ecologically to what's happening with an environmental scientist that accepts the truths of geoengineering and free energy and Fukushima. But in my ultimate chapters, I talk about various things regarding the ecology of consciousness and how this ties in with the shifting consciousness and the cosmic consciousness, and it ties in with that, and that we need to each have a responsibility to expand our understanding of ourselves in relation to nature in the modern world. But we need to also re-accept the ancient indigenous beliefs that all life is sacred and intrinsically affects our own actions, and even our thoughts affect the environment. And Masaru Emoto proved that with his studies on water. What more do we need? We've got proof with quantum physics and things we're discovering today regarding that. So only when we accept these ancient beliefs and educate ourselves with regards to nature, only then will we evolve and start living more ecologically with the earth. And we must begin to redefine our values as human beings, as part of a larger global community that is working towards change. In the midst of all this chaos, and we can begin to reclaim our connection with the earth in various ways through growing food communally, rebuilding and reinventing new